With a series of highly successful movies under their belts and new entries into their biggest series on the horizon, for what seems to be the first time in years, Sega looks to be back in action. For the longest time, the only series getting consistent releases were Sonic, Yakuza, and I guess technically Persona. In recent years though, they've really jumped up in production. They released sequels and remasters to their games while still introducing new IPs. They released and published over 30 games since 2019, not including ports and remasters. That's more than Bill Cosby Interactive, and almost as many as UNICEF and fuck. And in May of 2021, Sega announced plans to advance its growth even further by starting development on the so-called Super Game, and revealed their plans to revitalise their dormant IPs. For the longest time, not much was known about what the Super Game would actually involve, other than the fact that it would utilise a wide range of Sega's different resources, and it could cost around 100 billion yen. That's the equivalent of about £22. Eventually, it was revealed that the Super Game would actually be multiple Super Games, and finally, in 2022, it was leaked that the first Super Games will be new entries to the Crazy Taxi and Jet Set Radio series. At which point, I wrote the script of this video, decided I didn't have enough information to work with, gave up, and waited for news. Then after some more teasing, Sega just straight up announced 5 new reboots at TGA 2023, including Shinobi, Golden Axe, and Streets of Rage. At which point I came back to this script, decided I didn't have enough information to work with, gave up, and waited for more news. And it's been over a year since the Power Surge trailer, and without any new information, I'm quite bored, so fuck it.
The fuck is that?
I'm going to be mainly speculating on the Crazy Taxi and Jet Set Radio reboots because, to be honest, both series are extremely important to me. They both got their console start on the Dreamcast, one of my favourite systems. I have great memories of playing Crazy Taxi at the arcade when I was younger, and Jet Set Radio is just straight up my favourite game series. And aside from personal biases about the games, the fact that they're actually making these are kind of surprising. Obviously, Crazy Taxi has always been relatively popular, so a new game was inevitable, but even then, there hasn't been a new console entry to the series since 2003. But Jet Set hasn't had a full new game since 2002, and aside from that has only had a demake and a remaster of the first game released worldwide. This makes a spin-off/sequel, Jet Set Radio Future, effectively impossible to play on modern hardware. In fact, Sega shot down 2 different proposals for new games. One in 2006 that would have been a Wii exclusive sequel to the first game, and one in 2017 which would have been more similar to Future. The latter had a trailer and assets made, and even Sony expressed interest in the project. I mean, they don't even express interest in conventions anymore. Both series to this day have massive cult followings, even inspiring other, smaller studios to make games in the same style, and both have performed exceptionally well in popularity polls in the past. So regardless, it's pretty cool that they're finally getting to see the spotlight again. But they're not going to be small either. Sega has already said that these are going to be big budget AAA games, and they're aiming for them to be Fortnite style hits. What the fuck does that mean?
Fuck you, whore! We like Fortnite! We like Fortnite!
So this is where people are starting to get pretty concerned. What do they mean by Fortnite style? I guess the best case scenario is that they were using Fortnite as an example of a popular game, which many people know and have a positive outlook towards. Mostly. Let's be honest though, that's a pretty hefty goal, even for a more established brand like Sega, so the only other option is free to play, microtransaction supported, live service. Words that strike fear into anyone who has even touched a controller. A sudden blow to one's sanity, like the feeling of being kicked around the back of the head by a horse. A horse wearing particularly sturdy armor. I don't know where I was going with that, but the point is, people are starting to feel slightly pessimistic towards these games to say the least. But why? I mean, on a positive point of view, the game gets constant updates, new content, it provides a social space, and most people don't even have to pay a cent or 10 at all. And we get to laugh at the shit for brains who spend 20 quid in a 3D model that you can't even use in 10 years or so when the game inevitably shuts down. Yeah, my optimism can only go so far. Many of these games are basically designed to draw in as much money from you as possible. They bring you in with the promise of a low or even non-existent starting price and then lock you behind paywalls, which basically means that if you want any sort of consistent enjoyment from it, you're going to have to pay obscene amounts of money. Not only that, but in the process of designing the game around these microtransactions, you essentially forget that the point of the game is that it's supposed to be fun. Now, I personally believe that fun games can be built around this model, and they most definitely have been. But you can't really shake the feeling that the idea of these games were made first and foremost as a freemium service, not as a real game. And when you put all of the effort into the service, the passion in making the game takes a hit. You're not buying a game with a service, you're buying a service for a game, whereas you could just be buying a game made by people who genuinely cared about what they were putting out. And if that game goes offline, chances are you won't be able to play it again. And if you can, then it's unlikely you'll get the full experience. That's why people were so mad at Nintendo and Sony for closing their online stores. Many games are essentially now forgotten about. And with game preservation becoming more and more important now that video games have become a mainstream art form of sorts, the live service model without any offline alternative is seeming less and less practical for people who want to play these games in the future. Imagine if the owner of a famous painting has just decided it served its purpose and destroyed it for something more attractive. Or like The Lion King was removed from Disney Plus in favour of a new season of the much more profitable, Keeping Up with the Kardashians private oncology research institute of Beverly Hills. But let's say that Sega made a consumer-friendly, long-term solution to this model. How well would it actually play out?
I don't know what I'm doing.
I'm fairly certain that most people are at least somewhat aware with Crazy Taxi's gameplay, since it's pretty self-explanatory, so I'll keep this brief. In essence, it's an arcade-style game where you pick up the passengers and take them to wherever the hell they want to go, normally some kind of brand tie-in. You get points based on how many passengers you picked up, how much money you earned, how quickly you complete tasks, etc, etc. Jet Set Radio also has some arcade-like elements. Basically, in most of the levels, you're given a time limit, and you have to tag all the targets in an area and not let the police start another international controversy. You get points based on how quickly you finished, any skate tricks you performed, etc, etc. This is expanded upon with some pseudo open world elements in the sequel. So thinking about that, how the hell are they actually going to adapt these games into live service? Well, elements of Jet Set could be adapted into an MMO format, but the basic gameplay formula would have to be altered drastically. I guess that was already kind of done with Future, so the series definitely has room for flexibility. As for Crazy Taxi though, I don't really know what that could entail. Aside from a free-to-play version with maybe a live leaderboard, but that doesn't really scream AAA big budget release. The only way that either of these games could be adapted into this formula effectively is if they were changed from the ground up. Instead of a proper new entry into the series, they would become new games entirely with just a Jet Set or Crazy Taxi themed coat of paint. And at that point, why would you even bother with keeping the IP? Well, the recognition. All of the games they're remaking have big fan bases that have been wanting new entries for years. If these games were changed too much, then they would basically be seen as a cheap cash grab regardless of how much effort went into creating it. Because when people say that they want a new game in the series, they're not usually going to settle for some random bullshit. Remember when Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival got announced and people got mad because they thought it was going to be a new mainline game? Nintendo probably never planned to make an actual Animal Crossing Wii U game, but it seemed like a waste of resources and a broken promise when fans saw what was actually happening. And regardless of whether the game was good or not, it wasn't by the way, it would have still left a bad taste in their mouths. At that point, the last Animal Crossing game was only a few years old. Just imagine what would happen if they tried this with a game that hasn't had a proper new installment in over 2 decades. Okay, quick tangent before we get into the bigger stuff, this will make more sense later. Wouldn't it be odd if a game partly about rising up against a tyrannical corporation was filled with what many people consider to be corporate scams? I'm just saying.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
So we need to start by addressing the obvious. People don't really like game companies at the moment. There's been both accusations and solid proof of many companies mistreating consumers and employees and straight up breaking the law in some cases. It just seems like the point of their business is to churn out whatever distracting shit the boardroom can come up with to squeeze every penny from their supposedly brain-dead audience. And believe it or not, people don't like that from an industry that's supposed to provide joy and escapism first and foremost. So when a CEO of a company as prolific as Square Enix comes out with a press release full of boring marketing buzzwords like metaverse and blockchain, which have been used so much in the past few years that they've basically lost any meaning they've had, you can't help but feel like they've given up. They'd rather go for some quick money rather than emphasize the effort and genuine art that goes into creating a video game. And if that's the case, then what's next for Sega? I'm just praying that they don't go down the same road as Square and the like. But above all of this blockchain stuff is just groundwork for the one fad that pretty much everybody is sick of. And I apologise in advance, but I'm gonna have to say the N-word.
Butt shot.
NFTs are fucking stupid and they can't work in almost all types of video games. I'm going to ignore the frankly unnecessary amount of energy that it takes to power them, because there's already solutions to that. And the obnoxious community made up almost exclusively of the type of motherfuckers who pretended to invest in GameStop, because everybody already hates them. I'm going to ignore the fact that it adds scarcity to a digital format that could theoretically make things infinite. I could go into depth about all of this another time, and whether or not you're in favour of them, you've heard it all before. But here's the thing, I strongly disagree with the opinion that it could be used to make games better.
Oh, you could buy a weapon in one game and use it in another.
Alright, number one, first, I didn't used to have to buy them. At one point, all I needed to do was unlock them. 2, right, I can't wait to show up to the new Avatar game with my fucking strap. 3, let's say that the best weapon in one game does 100 points of damage and the best in another does 1000, because, you know, that's how balancing works. The latter weapon is going to be way too OP in the former game, and the former weapon is going to do bugger all in the latter game. And 4, how the hell do you expect game companies to work together to get things to function properly? They can't even work together to get shit on the same platform. Okay, I understand that this is all my personal opinion for the most part. People have suggested some actually constructive things that technology could be used for. It's just a shame that they're not nearly as profitable. And that's what it's all about. Money. It's a quick way to add a new layer of microtransactions into a game. It's a new way of paywalling content, but this time it's behind an even more complicated process. Plus, it has an obnoxious buzzword to go with it. And Jet Set Radio in particular kind of already has the groundwork in place to support it. I mean, the custom graffiti you can make in-game could be sold in Sega's new OpenSea clone, and the collectible graffiti souls could be turned into an NFT system themselves. Oh god, I'm done with this. Alright, I'm aware that this is all just speculation. We have no idea what any of these new games are going to involve, so why am I getting upset about this now? Well, frankly, I'm worried. I'm honestly disappointed with how the games industry has been handling itself in the last decade or so. I'm tired of getting interest in new releases only for them to have endless asterisks attached. I remember when DLC was added due to a genuine need to continue the game, back when horse armor was the exception and not the rule. Games would come out finished and playable without the need for updates, and microtransactions were only added if there was no way for the developer to make money otherwise. My first console was the PlayStation 2, so I still vaguely remember when some of this stuff was just unheard of. Call it nostalgia or weird brand loyalty, but to me, Sega's always stood out in their own way, especially back when they still made consoles. They had all the edgy games that upset the church on the Mega Drive, took a gamble by releasing the Saturn early to drum up hype, and when they were on their last legs with the Dreamcast, they weren't afraid to go out with a bang. Sure, they've released some hot garbage over the years, but they were one of the companies that usually felt in touch with their fanbase for the most part. In fact, Sega has straight up said they'll abandon NFTs entirely if they're just seen as a way to make money rather than a way to enhance gameplay.
Based.
So it seems that at their core, they still hold the values that I believe good game companies used to have. I know for a fact that nobody at Sega is watching this, and it's pointless trying to reason with a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but goddammit, I'm gonna try it anyway. Sega, you've got money, talents and resources to bring third-party games back to the standard that the average consumer deserves. The original Super games date back to an era where games were made to be fun by people who cared about their craft. And with a new generation of gaming just beginning, please set the standard that all the other soulless corporate entities should follow. Please send the message that all the average gamer wants to do is just play a game. They want to take a few hours out their time and just enjoy themselves for once. I mean, they already get enough shit from calling themselves gamers anyway. And personally, I just want some games in some of my favourite series that I can enjoy now, replay 20 years into the future, maybe even share them with some kids I'll never have. All with the peace of mind that I'll have the same experience I did back then, and everything I'll need to enjoy it will just be on one disc. For now though, I'm going to remain cautiously optimistic about these new games. After all, they're follow-ups to series that I'm heavily nostalgic for and still thoroughly enjoyed this game. In fact, while I was finishing this script, a new Shinobi game came out and it's basically everything I wanted. I'm really impressed with how it's looking so far and I'm definitely going to give it a go, but not before clearing my backlog first. It's going somewhere in between Dream Daddy and The Search for Fran. I'm going to wait for the first proper trailers for the rest of the game to come out before making any judgment on them though. Regardless, I'm just happy that the streets of Tokyo-to are about to explode once again. I can't think of a crazy taxi reference to end this on. Sega's about to make some crazy money from crypto, NFC, metaverse, blockchain, decentralization.
Presented by
Bye, shot.